There is a funny, old-fashioned sort of honesty in looking at a jar of red wine and seeing the soil it grew in, the rain that watered it, and the hands that picked it. But on a mid-June day in Paris, 2026, that jar becomes a bargaining chip on a very different kind of table, one covered in spreadsheets and diplomatic cables. This isn't just about a tariff. It is a clash of two very different ideas of value: the French insistence on taxing the invisible world of digital services, and the American retaliation wielded through the very tangible, earthy pleasure of wine. Let's sit with this chart for a moment and look at what the sky is actually saying when that threat lands. The moment. The atmosphere in Paris on this day is frantic, split, and deeply cerebral. With the sun and moon both in Gemini, the sign of duality and communication, we are looking at a situation defined entirely by documents and decrees. This is the digital in the digital services tax, disembodied, fast-moving information. The moon is in a balsamic phase, that dark time of the lunar cycle just before the new moon, suggesting this isn't a fresh start but the culmination of a long, tired argument. The air is thick with talk. However, the undeniable physical reality of the moment is Mars in Taurus, standing at the very top of the chart, conjunct the midheaven. Mars is the planet of aggression and war. Taurus is the sign of money, land, agriculture, and possessions. To have Mars here in the position of public visibility is a blunt instrument. A 100% tariff is a Martian strike aimed squarely at the Tarian economy, agriculture, luxury goods, and the earthy wealth of the French nation. The United States is not attacking with ether or digital code here. They are hitting France where it hurts most, the vineyard. It is a rigid, stubborn signature. Mars in Taurus does not move quickly, it dug its heels in. The wider cyclic index is high, over 800, which tells us the world is already simmering with tension. Things are not stable. This specific flashpoint erupts against a backdrop of global economic fracturing. The tight aspect between Venus and Uranus, a sextile but disruptive, suggests sudden shifts in financial alliances, while Pluto quincunx the ascendant hints that the public face of the French government is having to make an uncomfortable, invisible adjustment to a much darker power play happening backstage. What it touches. When we look at how the sky of this event presses against the birth chart of the French Fifth Republic, the pressure points are severe. The most immediate shock is Uranus hitting France's natal Mars. Uranus is the disruptor, the lightning bolt. Mars is the country's military assertiveness and its industry. This transit screams of a sudden rupture in how France projects its strength. You don't issue a tax on digital giants without expecting a fight, but the nature of this strike, sudden via economic warfare rather than diplomatic channels, catches the administration off guard. More deeply, transiting Pluto is sitting in a tight square to France's natal Jupiter. In mundane astrology, Jupiter represents the law, international trade, and the judiciary. Pluto is the lord of the underworld, foreign debt, taxes, and coercive power. A square is a blockage, a forced confrontation. Here is the image. France tries to expand its tax base and assert its legal sovereignty, the DST, only to be met by a raw, crushing power from abroad that aims to strangle that prosperity. It is a battle over who gets to control the wealth. The synastry between France and Donald Trump reveals the personal color of this policy. France's Saturn, the planet of limits, borders, and stern reality, sits directly on Trump's moon, which rules his public appeal and emotional security. To Donald Trump, France is the wet blanket, the strict authority figure saying no. He experiences the French state as an affront to his personal success. It is fascinating too that France's North Node, its destiny, is sexed to his sun. They are fated to deal with one another, and this specific conflict over taxes seems to be karmically charged, part of a longer evolutionary negotiation between American economic might and European statecraft. France's own Saturn is also under pressure from a transiting Mars quincunx. The state apparatus, the ministries, the regulators, is being forced to adjust its mechanisms rapidly. There is a friction here. The government cannot simply react with their usual slow, bureaucratic pace. The American demand Mars is forcing a restructuring Saturn of how France protects its economic interests.
What?
How it rolls forward. This does not blow over in a week. The astrological roadmap for the months following June 15th suggests we are watching the first act of a longer drama. The lead up to this moment was marked by the Saturn sextile Pluto aspect in late March. That was the moment the hard lines were drawn in private, the concrete poured for the economic walls we now see. By the time the threat arrives, the foundation is already set. Looking forward, the summer of 2026 is dominated by a complex dance of Jupiter. In July, Jupiter forms a trine to Neptune and an opposition to Pluto. This is a period of high-stakes illusion and deal-making. Jupiter, Trump's ruler and the planet of law, opposing Pluto, the US foreign power leverage, suggests that negotiations will be deceptive and intense. We may see threats made that are not carried out, or deals that are actually capitulations disguised as victories. The fog will be thick. However, by late July, Jupiter also sextiles Uranus and trines Saturn. This is a signature of a grand bargain, a sudden, perhaps unexpected restructuring of the trade relationship that tries to paper over the cracks with new regulations. The real cliff to watch, however, is August. On August 12th, a total solar eclipse falls at 20 degrees Leo. In mundane charts, Leo rules the sovereign, the head of state, Macron, but also the house of pleasure, leisure, luxury, and indeed wine. Eclipses act as wildcards that expose what is hidden. This eclipse suggests that the economic pain of these tariffs hit on the pleasure industries might cause a political crisis or a sudden shift in leadership strategy. Leo is the heart of the nation. If the wine exports are choked, the heart is pinched. Mars entering Cancer in mid-August complicates the mood further. The god of war in the sign of home and protection turns the economic fight into an emotional nationalist squabble. It becomes less about the fine print of tax law and more about protecting our own. The cyclic index remains high, continuing its rise toward dispersal, meaning the volatility we see on this June day is merely the atmosphere for the rest of the year.
Summary.
This moment marks a collision between the intellectual realm of digital tax law and the brutal reality of agricultural protectionism, where economic weapons are drawn in a climate of high global tension. First, a shock to the system. Watch for sudden volatile disruptions in French industry and labour strikes as transiting Uranus ignites the nation's natal Mars, destabilising the government's usual method of control. Second, economic strangulation. The tariff threat is a direct application of transiting Pluto's square to France's Jupiter, a signature of foreign powers attempting to restructure the nation's wealth and tax laws through coercive debt and trade barriers. Third, the victim narrative. Expect Donald Trump to frame these actions as him defending himself against a hostile oppressor, as France's restrictive Saturn conjoins his moon, painting the French state as the enemy of his popular support. Fourth, a deal in the fog. Negotiations in July will likely be confusing and deceptive, driven by a Jupiter-Pluto opposition that suggests backroom deals and hidden leverage are being used rather than open diplomacy. And finally, the August reckoning. The total solar eclipse in Leo on August 12th threatens to expose the true cost of this trade war to the luxury and tourism sectors, potentially sparking a leadership crisis or a sudden pivot in national strategy. The chart warns that while the words are digital, the wound is physical, and the soil of France will feel the weight of the sky long after the threat is made.